Welcome to Edupedia World Grade 10 Computer Science Video Lecture Series. I am Upeka Vendibona, and from this episode we are going to discuss about how to create functions in C++. A function is a named sequence of statements. A function can return a result and we call it return value. The standard library provides a lot of useful functions such as the square root function, sqrt, and power of function, POW. However, we can also write many functions ourselves too. Take a look at the first code segment. That is how we wrote the square function. The first line of this definition tells us that this is a function and it is called square and it takes an int argument and it returns an int value. The type of the result always comes first in a function declaration. If the function does not return anything, you can leave blank in here. And within the parentheses, you should mention the parameters that it takes as arguments. So here it takes a int type argument that we defined as a int x parameter. A function can have non-parameters, one parameter or many parameters. When you pass arguments to this function, it is important the number of parameters and the order of parameters mentioned in the function. In the second code segment, you can see how this square function is being used. In the first cout, it calls the square function and pass the int argument value 2. So at the square function, 2 multiplied by 2, it is 4. So there it will print out 4. In the second cout, it calls the square function with the int argument 10. So at the square function, 10 multiplied by 10 is 100. So with the cout, it will print out 100. Now take a look at the third code segment. There it mentions several typical mistakes that you make when you calling functions. The first code line, it calls the square function by passing the argument value 2. So it is correct, but the return value, the result, is not being effectively used. It is not captured to any other variable, or it is not print out, so it is not using the return value. So this is a waste of calling a function without doing anything. In the second code line, it is calling the square function and tries to assign the return value into an int variable, but without passing any arguments. As the function declaration, it says one parameter, int parameter is needed, but here no arguments, so it will give you an error. In the third code line, it is missing the parentheses. To call a function, you need the parentheses, even though there are no arguments. So here it will give you an error for missing the parentheses. In the fourth code line, it passing 2 arguments, but at the function declaration, it mentions only one int type argument is needed. So here it will give you an error for having too many arguments. In the fifth code line, it is calling the square function by passing a string type argument. Now at the function declaration, it mentions a int type parameter. As the types are mismatching, this will give you an error for wrong type of argument and int is expected. Okay. Now always try to avoid these typical mistakes. The syntax of a function definition can be described like this. It has a type, it has an identifier, within the parentheses it has a parameter list, within the curly braces it has a function body. Type means the return type, identifier means the name of the function. The function body is the block that actually does the work. So in our previous program, the function square, return x multiplied by x is in the function body. So that means in the function body, it has the statements to be executed. The list of arguments required by the function is called a parameter list and its elements are called parameters. Now we are talking about the importance and benefits of functions. We define a function when we want to separate computation with a name, because doing so makes the computation logically separate, make the program text much clearer, make it possible to use the function in more than one place in our program, and eases testing. Note that the real world programs uses thousands and thousands of functions. Obviously, we would never be able to write or understand such programs if their parts, which means the computations, were not clearly separated and named. There might be people who are happy to write x multiplied by x rather than using a function square with the argument x. However, that's only because square is a very simple computation. Consider the square root. You prefer to write sqrt with the argument x rather than repeating the complicated and many lines long code for computing the square root. Even better, you don't have to even look at the computation of square root because knowing that sqrt gives the square root of x is sufficient. Now take a look at this code example. If we don't want to return a result from a function, you can use the keyword void. So rather than leaving it blank, you can use this keyword too. It is actually a good practice to mention the keyword void if the function does not return anything, because it will improve the readability. Now this function print square is not like the previous function square, because this is rather a specialized version that we could not expect to be able to use later, but where the square function is an obvious candidate for other users. This print square function performs two logically separate actions. It prints and it calculates a square. Programs are usually easy to write and to understand if each function performs a single logical action. Basically, the square function is the better design. Now, did you notice that all the information needed to call a function was in the first line of its definition? In our previous program, it mentions the return value data type, the name of the function that you should call, and the type of the arguments, the number of arguments, and the order of the arguments. We don't really need to look at the function body. In real programs, we most often don't want to look at a function body. Just saying the declaration of the function is enough, because seeing the definition would just be distracting. And just by seeing the declaration, we know how to call the function. And with that, we are going to end up this episode. So from this episode, we get to know how to create functions and the importance of having functions. From the next episode, we are talking about vectors in C++. Thank you for watching and stay tuned on with Edupedia World.